The morning sun cast long shadows across Arlington National Cemetery, as Specialist Marcus Rodriguez adjusted his perfectly pressed uniform for the 100th time that week. Standing 6 feet tall with shoulders that could carry the weight of the world, Marcus had spent the last 18 months guarding the tomb of the unknown soldier. Every step he took was measured, every movement precise, every breath controlled. This was not just a job for Marcus. It was a sacred duty that had consumed his entire being. Marcus had grown up in a small town in Texas where military service ran in his family like blood through veins. His grandfather had served in World War II, his father in Vietnam, and now Marcus carried on the tradition. But unlike his family members who had seen combat in distant lands, Marcus had chosen a different kind of battlefield, one where the enemy was complacency, disrespect, and the gradual fading of memory. The tomb guard duty was unlike anything else in the military. While other soldiers trained with weapons and tactics, Marcus trained his mind to achieve perfect stillness. While others learned to adapt to changing situations, Marcus learned to perform the same routine with mechanical precision, day after day, regardless of weather, regardless of crowds, regardless of personal feelings. Rain or shine, snow or blazing heat, the guard never stopped walking. 21 steps south, turn and face east for 21 seconds, turn and face north for 21 seconds, then 21 steps north. The cycle continued every moment of every day, year after year. What most visitors to Arlington didn't understand was the incredible physical and mental demands placed on the tomb guards. Marcus had to memorize detailed information about every person buried in Arlington National Cemetery. Over 400,000 graves. He had to know the history of the tomb, the significance of every ceremony, and be prepared to answer any question a visitor might ask. His uniform had to be perfect, with every ribbon, every crease, every button positioned exactly according to regulations that were stricter than anywhere else in the military. The selection process to become a tomb guard was brutal. Out of hundreds who applied, only a few dozen were chosen each year. Marcus remembered his own selection like it was yesterday. He had spent weeks preparing, studying, practicing his walk, learning to control every muscle in his body. The final test had lasted for hours, with instructors examining every detail of his performance under intense pressure. Many candidates broke under the stress, but Marcus had found something inside himself that day, a reservoir of determination that surprised even him. Living quarters for the tomb guards were located beneath the Memorial Amphitheater, in an underground world that few people knew existed. Here Marcus and his fellow guards lived a life of discipline that made basic military training look relaxed. They spent hours each day maintaining their uniforms, polishing their shoes to a mirror finish, and practicing their movements until they could perform them perfectly even while asleep. There were no casual clothes, no relaxed moments, no breaking character. They were always on duty, always representing something larger than themselves. The weight of responsibility had changed Marcus in ways he hadn't expected. Before becoming a tomb guard, he had been like any other young soldier, eager for action, looking forward to weekends, dreaming about his future after the military. But standing guard over the unknown soldier had taught him something profound about service, sacrifice, and the meaning of honor. Every day, he stood watch over men who had died for their country but whose names were lost to history. These unknown soldiers represented every service member who had ever made the ultimate sacrifice, and Marcus felt their presence with him during every moment of his watch. The routine was both a blessing and a curse. The endless repetition created a meditative state that Marcus had never experienced before. During his walks, his mind would often drift to thoughts about the soldiers he was guarding, about the families who would never know where their loved ones were buried, about the price of freedom that most people took for granted. Sometimes visitors would thank him for his service, not understanding that he should be thanking them for the privilege of serving in this sacred place. But the routine was also mentally challenging in ways that were difficult to explain to outsiders. Performing the same movements thousands of times required a kind of mental strength that was different from physical courage. It was about conquering the small voice in your head that wanted to vary the routine, to take shortcuts, to relax standards when nobody was watching. It was about maintaining excellence when excellence felt impossible, about finding motivation in duty itself rather than in external rewards. Marcus had developed his own internal dialogue during his walks. He would think about his grandfather's stories from the war, about the letters his father had written home from Vietnam, about the young men and women currently serving in dangerous places around the world. Each step became a prayer, each turn a promise to remember. The cemetery around him was filled with heroes whose stories would never be told, whose sacrifices were known only to God and country. Marcus felt honored to be their guardian, even if most days he felt unworthy of the responsibility. The physical demands were intense as well. Standing perfectly still for hours put enormous strain on the body. The heavy wool uniform was designed for appearance, not comfort, and in the summer heat of Washington, D.C., it could feel like wearing a furnace. In winter, the wind would cut through the cemetery like a knife, but the guard never showed discomfort, never acknowledged the weather, never broke character. Marcus had learned to find warmth in his sense of purpose, to draw strength from something deeper than physical comfort. As he prepared for another day of duty, Marcus had no idea that his life was about to change dramatically. A conversation he would have later that morning would challenge everything he thought he knew about himself, and set him on a path that would test not just his skills as a tomb guard, but his character as a man. The precision and discipline he had developed over 18 months were about to be put to a test unlike anything he could imagine. The sun climbed higher in the sky, visitors began to gather, and Marcus stepped out to begin another day of walking his sacred post, unaware that this day would be different from all the others. The unexpected visitor arrived during the changing of the guard ceremony, when tourists lined the barriers and cameras clicked constantly. Colonel James Patterson stood among the crowd, but unlike the others who watched with casual interest, his eyes followed every movement with the trained observation of a career military officer. He had silver hair that spoke of decades of service and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail they encountered. Marcus noticed him immediately, something about the man's bearing, the way he stood. The intensity of his focus set him apart from typical visitors. After the ceremony concluded and the crowds dispersed, Colonel Patterson approached the barrier where Marcus had resumed his solitary vigil. This was unusual because visitors were instructed to remain silent and maintain respectful distance. Marcus continued his measured walk, but his peripheral vision tracked the older man's movements. The colonel stood perfectly still, his posture military straight, hands clasped behind his back. He waited patiently through 3 complete cycles of Marcus's routine before speaking. When Marcus completed his southward walk and turned to face east, Colonel Patterson's voice cut through the morning air with crisp military precision. He identified himself and requested permission to speak with Specialist Rodriguez after his shift. The request was formal, respectful, but carried an undertone of authority that suggested this was not a casual social visit. Marcus acknowledged with the slightest nod, the only response permitted while on duty, and continued his routine while his mind raced with questions about what this unexpected encounter might mean. The remainder of Marcus's shift passed differently than usual. The familiar routine that normally occupied his entire attention now felt automatic while his thoughts churned with curiosity and mild apprehension. Colonel Patterson had mentioned the Army's Special Operations community during their brief exchange, words that carried weight and mystery in military circles. Marcus knew that Special Operations units recruited from across the Army, looking for soldiers with exceptional skills and mental toughness. But he had never considered himself a candidate for such elite units, seeing his role as a tomb guard as his calling and career path. When his replacement arrived for the next shift, Marcus performed the changing of the guard ceremony with his usual precision, but underneath his calm exterior, anticipation bubbled like water approaching a boil. He had grown comfortable with the predictability of his life at Arlington. Each day brought the same challenges, the same rewards, the same sense of purpose. The idea that someone from outside this world had noticed him and sought him out was both flattering and unsettling. Colonel Patterson waited in the visitor center, sitting ramrod straight in a plastic chair that seemed too small for his commanding presence. When Marcus arrived in his dress uniform, the colonel stood and extended his hand with a firm grip that conveyed both respect and evaluation. They found a quiet corner where they could speak privately, away from the constant stream of tourists and cemetery visitors. The colonel's opening words were direct and surprising. He had been observing tomb guards for several months, studying their selection process, training methods, and performance standards. He explained that the Army was developing a new program that required individuals with very specific psychological and physical capabilities. The mental discipline required to excel as a tomb guard, combined with the physical precision and unwavering attention to detail, had caught the attention of senior military leaders who were looking for soldiers capable of handling extremely demanding assignments. Marcus listened with growing fascination as Colonel Patterson outlined the challenges facing modern military operations. Technology had revolutionized warfare, but it had also created new vulnerabilities and demands. The Army needed soldiers who could operate with absolute precision under intense pressure, who could maintain focus and discipline during extended periods of stress, and who possessed the mental toughness to perform flawlessly when failure meant catastrophic consequences. The skills that made someone an exceptional tomb guard, the colonel explained, were remarkably similar to those required for highly classified special operations. The conversation took an unexpected turn when Colonel Patterson described a new testing protocol that the Army was developing. Traditional military assessments focused on physical fitness, marksmanship, and tactical knowledge. But emerging threats required soldiers with capabilities that went beyond conventional military skills. The program needed individuals who could demonstrate perfect performance under conditions designed to break concentration, test mental endurance, and evaluate decision-making under extreme stress. Colonel Patterson's proposal was both intriguing and daunting. He wanted Marcus to participate in an experimental evaluation that would push the boundaries of human performance. The test would combine elements of physical challenge, mental endurance, and psychological pressure in ways that had never been attempted before. It would require Marcus to leave his post at Arlington temporarily and travel to a classified facility where he would face challenges designed by some of the Army's most innovative trainers and psychologists. The offer came with both opportunity and risk. Success could open doors to elite units and specialized assignments that most soldiers could only dream about. The training and experiences would transform him into a more capable and versatile soldier. But failure could mean the end of his military career. And even attempting the test meant leaving behind the sacred duty that had defined his life for the past 18 months. Marcus found himself torn between conflicting emotions. His dedication to the tomb was absolute, and the thought of abandoning his post felt like betraying a sacred trust. The unknown soldiers depended on guards like him to maintain their vigil, to ensure that their sacrifice was never forgotten. How could he consider walking away from that responsibility for personal advancement? But Colonel Patterson seemed to understand his internal conflict. He explained that the Army had specifically chosen to approach tomb guards because their dedication to duty was unquestioned. The military needed soldiers who understood service at the deepest level, who had proven their commitment to something larger than themselves. Marcus's reluctance to leave his post was actually proof that he was exactly the kind of person they were looking for. The colonel provided details about the logistics of the program. Marcus would have a temporary replacement at the tomb, another qualified guard who would maintain the standards and traditions during his absence. The test itself would last approximately 2 weeks, conducted at a secure facility where he would face challenges designed to evaluate every aspect of his capabilities. The evaluation would be overseen by experts from multiple military specialties, including psychologists who specialized in human performance under stress. As their conversation continued, Marcus began to understand that this opportunity represented more than just personal advancement. The colonel explained that the insights gained from this testing program could influence how the Army trained and selected soldiers for critical missions. Marcus's participation could contribute to developing better methods for preparing soldiers to face the challenges of modern warfare. His service as a tomb guard had prepared him to be part of something that could benefit countless future soldiers. The weight of the decision pressed down on Marcus, like the summer heat reflecting off the marble monuments around them. This choice would define not just his immediate future, but potentially the entire trajectory of his military career and his understanding of what it meant to serve his country. 3 days of intense internal debate followed Marcus's conversation with Colonel Patterson. He walked his post at the tomb with the same mechanical precision as always, but his mind wrestled with the most difficult decision of his military career. During his off-duty hours, he found himself pacing the underground quarters beneath the Memorial Amphitheater, weighing the pros and cons of leaving his sacred duty for an unknown challenge. The other tomb guards noticed his distraction. though Marcus tried to hide it. Sergeant Thompson, who had been guarding the tomb for 3 years and served as an unofficial mentor to newer guards, finally confronted Marcus during a uniform maintenance session. The conversation that followed helped Marcus understand that his dedication to the tomb didn't require him to spend his entire career there. Sometimes serving the greater good meant accepting new challenges, even when those challenges took you away from work you loved. Marcus made his decision on a quiet Tuesday morning as dawn broke over Arlington. He would accept Colonel Patterson's offer, but only after ensuring that his replacement was fully prepared to maintain the standards he had worked so hard to uphold. The next week passed in a blur of intensive training with his replacement, a young soldier named Williams who had recently completed the tomb guard selection process. Marcus shared not just the technical requirements of the duty, but the deeper understanding of what it meant to stand watch over the unknown soldier. The goodbye was harder than Marcus had anticipated. As he completed his final walk at the tomb, he felt the weight of 18 months of service settling into his bones. Every step across the marble plaza carried memories of rainy nights when he had maintained his vigil despite the weather, of moments when visitors had been moved to tears by the solemnity of the ceremony, of quiet hours when he had felt the presence of the unknown soldiers as a tangible force guiding his steps. Leaving this sacred ground felt like leaving a part of himself behind. The journey to the testing facility took him to a military installation he had never heard of, located in the mountains of Colorado, where the thin air and rugged terrain provided natural challenges for military training. The base appeared on no public maps and was surrounded by security measures that made it clear this was no ordinary army post. Marcus arrived with a single duffel bag containing his personal items and a head full of questions about what the next 2 weeks would bring. The facility itself was unlike any military installation Marcus had ever seen. Instead of the standard barracks and administrative buildings found at most army posts, this place looked more like a cross between a research laboratory and an extreme sports training center. Buildings were connected by covered walkways that seemed designed to protect against observation from above. The whole complex had an air of secrecy and purpose that made Marcus feel like he had stepped into a different world entirely. Colonel Patterson met him at the main gate and escorted him through a security process that was more thorough than anything Marcus had experienced. Even during his initial military processing, biometric scanners recorded his fingerprints, iris patterns, and voice prints. Background investigators had apparently conducted extensive interviews with people from his past, verifying details about his character and reliability that went far beyond standard military security clearances. The briefing room where Marcus received his initial orientation was sterile and windowless, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that made everything look slightly unreal. Colonel Patterson introduced him to a team of specialists who would oversee his evaluation. Dr. Sarah Chen, a sports psychologist who had worked with Olympic athletes. Major Rodriguez, a special forces officer who specialized in selection and training. And Dr. Michael Foster, a research scientist whose background was classified but apparently involved studying human performance under extreme conditions. The overview of the testing program was both fascinating and intimidating. Marcus would face challenges designed to evaluate every aspect of his capabilities, from physical endurance and strength to psychological resilience and decision-making under pressure. The tests would push him beyond anything he had experienced during his military training or his time as a tomb guard. Some challenges would be announced in advance, allowing him to prepare mentally, while others would come without warning to test his ability to adapt and perform under unexpected stress. Dr. Chen explained that the psychological component of the evaluation was particularly important. They were not just measuring Marcus's current capabilities, but trying to understand how his mind worked under pressure, how he recovered from failure, and how he maintained focus during extended periods of stress. The mental discipline he had developed as a tomb guard was exactly what they wanted to study and potentially replicate in other soldiers. The physical challenges would test not just strength and endurance, but precision and control under fatigue. Major Rodriguez described scenarios that would require Marcus to perform complex tasks while exhausted, to maintain accuracy while his body screamed for rest, and to make critical decisions when his judgment was clouded by physical stress. The ability to maintain standards regardless of personal comfort, which Marcus had developed during long hours standing guard in all weather conditions, would be pushed to its absolute limits. Dr. Foster's role was perhaps the most mysterious. He spoke in general terms about measuring stress responses, monitoring brain activity, and collecting data that would contribute to understanding human performance at the extremes. Marcus got the impression that he was not just being tested, but that he was participating in research that could influence how the Army approached training and selection for years to come. The first phase of testing would begin the next morning and would focus on establishing baseline measurements of Marcus's current capabilities. Physical fitness tests, cognitive assessments, and psychological evaluations would provide the foundation for everything that followed. The team wanted to understand exactly what Marcus could do before they began pushing him beyond those limits. That evening, Marcus was given quarters in a small but comfortable room that contained everything he needed, but nothing extra. The simplicity reminded him of his accommodations at Arlington, but the atmosphere was completely different. Instead of the quiet reverence of the cemetery, this place hummed with technological activity and scientific purpose. As he lay in his narrow bed, Marcus could hear the sound of generators and air conditioning systems working constantly to power whatever activities were taking place in other parts of the facility. Sleep came slowly as Marcus's mind processed everything he had learned during his first day. Tomorrow would begin the most challenging 2 weeks of his life, testing everything he had learned about himself during his time as a tomb guard. The precision, discipline, and mental toughness that had made him successful at Arlington would now be measured against standards he couldn't even imagine. He thought about the unknown soldiers resting beneath their marble tomb, wondering if they would approve of his decision to leave his post for this opportunity. In his heart, Marcus believed they would understand that serving one's country sometimes meant accepting new challenges, even when those challenges took you far from familiar ground. As he finally drifted off to sleep, his last conscious thought was a promise to those unknown soldiers that he would represent their memory with honor, no matter what the next 2 weeks might bring. The alarm sounded at 4:30 in the morning, dragging Marcus from a restless sleep filled with dreams of marble walkways and unknown challenges. Within minutes, he was dressed and reporting to the main testing facility, where Dr. Chen waited with a clipboard full of assessments and a smile that somehow managed to be both encouraging and slightly unsettling. The baseline testing phase was about to begin, and Marcus quickly learned that everything he thought he knew about military fitness standards was about to be turned upside down. The physical assessments started with familiar exercises, push-ups, sit-ups, running, but the standards were unlike anything Marcus had encountered. Instead of simple pass-fail criteria, every movement was monitored by sensors that measured muscle activation, balance, coordination, and efficiency. Cameras recorded his form from multiple angles, while computer programs analyzed his biomechanics in real time. Dr. Foster explained that they weren't just measuring what Marcus could do, but how his body accomplished those tasks and where his performance could potentially be improved. The running portion took place on a treadmill surrounded by monitors and sensors that looked more like medical equipment than exercise gear. Marcus ran for what felt like hours while technicians adjusted the speed, incline, and even the oxygen content of the air he was breathing. They measured his heart rate, breathing patterns, muscle fatigue, and brain activity as his body was pushed through different levels of stress. The data being collected would establish not just his current fitness level, but how his body responded to increasing demands and how quickly he recovered from exertion. Mental assessments proved even more challenging than the physical tests. Marcus found himself in a small room facing a computer screen that presented him with problem-solving exercises, memory tests, and reaction time challenges that seemed designed to measure every aspect of cognitive function. Some tests required split-second decisions, while others demanded sustained concentration over extended periods. The difficulty increased gradually until Marcus reached the point where he was making mistakes, allowing the researchers to map the exact limits of his mental capabilities. Dr. Chen administered psychological evaluations that probed areas of Marcus's personality and mental resilience that he had never really examined. Questions about his motivations, fears, response to stress, and decision-making processes revealed aspects of his character that surprised even him. The psychologist seemed particularly interested in how his time as a tomb guard had shaped his mental approach to challenge and his ability to maintain Performance standards under pressure. One particularly memorable assessment involved standing perfectly still for extended periods while distractions were introduced around him. Loud noises, flashing lights, people moving in his peripheral vision, and even mild physical discomfort were all used to test his ability to maintain focus. This test felt familiar to Marcus, reminding him of his duty at the tomb when crowds of visitors, changing weather, and unexpected events had to be ignored while he maintained his vigil. He performed better on this assessment than any of the researchers had expected. The second day introduced stress inoculation exercises that pushed Marcus into entirely new territory. He found himself in scenarios designed to simulate high-pressure situations where perfect performance was required, despite physical discomfort, mental fatigue, and psychological pressure. One exercise required him to complete complex manual tasks while loud, discordant music played and strobe lights flashed around him. Another involved solving mathematical problems while standing in uncomfortably cold water that gradually got deeper and colder as time passed. Major Rodriguez supervised combat-related assessments that tested Marcus's ability to maintain accuracy and decision-making capability under conditions that simulated battlefield stress. Shooting exercises were conducted while Marcus was physically exhausted, mentally fatigued, and subjected to realistic sound effects that replicated the chaos of combat. Navigation tests required him to find his way through complex terrain while carrying heavy equipment and operating on minimal sleep. Each challenge was designed to determine how well he could perform critical tasks when his body and mind were operating at the very edge of their capabilities. The technology being used to monitor Marcus's performance was unlike anything he had ever seen. Sensors tracked everything from his brain waves to the micro movements of his muscles. Computers analyzed his stress responses, recovery patterns, and adaptation mechanisms in real time. Dr. Foster explained that they were essentially creating a complete map of how Marcus's body and mind functioned under different types and levels of stress. This information would be used to understand not just his individual capabilities, but how soldiers with similar backgrounds might be expected to perform in extreme situations. By the end of the first week, Marcus felt like he had been taken apart and examined at the molecular level. Every strength and weakness had been identified, measured, and recorded. The researchers now knew more about his capabilities than he did himself. But instead of feeling diminished by this intense scrutiny, Marcus found himself energized by the challenge and curious about what the second week would bring. The baseline testing had been demanding, but he sensed that the real test was yet to come. The data collected during the first week painted a picture of Marcus that was both encouraging and humbling. His physical capabilities were above average but not exceptional by military standards. His mental resilience and ability to maintain focus under pressure, however, were off the charts. The discipline and psychological toughness he had developed as a tomb guard had created capabilities that the researchers found remarkable. Dr. Chen told him that his ability to maintain performance standards regardless of external conditions was among the best they had ever measured. The psychological profile that emerged from the first week's testing revealed someone who had developed an unusual combination of mental toughness and emotional stability. Marcus's commitment to duty had created a personality structure that was remarkably resistant to stress and highly motivated by service to others rather than personal gain. The researchers were particularly interested in how his sense of purpose seemed to actually enhance his performance under pressure, rather than create additional stress. As the first week concluded, Colonel Patterson met with Marcus to discuss the results and prepare him for what would come next. The baseline testing had confirmed that Marcus possessed the fundamental capabilities they were looking for, but the second week would determine whether he could perform at levels that exceeded normal human limitations. The challenges ahead would be unlike anything in standard military training, designed to explore the absolute boundaries of human performance. Marcus spent his last evening of the baseline phase reflecting on everything he had learned about himself. The testing had revealed capabilities he didn't know he possessed and weaknesses he hadn't recognized. More importantly, it had shown him that the skills he had developed as a tomb guard, the mental discipline, attention to detail, and unwavering commitment to standards, were more valuable and transferable than he had ever imagined. The second week would test whether these capabilities could be applied in scenarios that pushed far beyond anything he had previously experienced. As Marcus prepared for sleep, he felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension about the challenges ahead. Tomorrow would begin the real test, and he would finally learn whether his 18 months of standing guard over the unknown soldier had prepared him for challenges he couldn't yet imagine. The second week began before dawn with an unexpected wake-up call that would set the tone for everything that followed. Instead of the gentle alarm Marcus had grown accustomed to, his door burst open at 3 a.m. as armed figures in tactical gear flooded his room shouting commands. Within seconds he was blindfolded, restrained, and dragged from his bed in what appeared to be a realistic kidnapping scenario. His heart pounded as training kicked in, but nothing from his background had prepared him for the disorientation and stress of this sudden assault on his senses. The next several hours passed in a blur of controlled chaos designed to test Marcus's psychological resilience under extreme stress. He was placed in uncomfortable positions, subjected to loud noises and bright lights, and questioned aggressively about information he didn't possess. The scenario was carefully controlled and monitored, but felt completely real to Marcus as he struggled to maintain his composure while everything familiar was stripped away. This was stress inoculation taken to levels that pushed the boundaries of what was considered acceptable in military training. When the exercise finally ended and Marcus was returned to normal conditions, Dr. Chen was waiting with monitoring equipment to assess his recovery patterns. The data showed that while Marcus had experienced significant stress during the scenario, his recovery was remarkably rapid and complete. More importantly, his cognitive function and decision-making capability remained sharp throughout the ordeal. The mental discipline he had developed standing guard through long, difficult nights at Arlington had created a psychological foundation that remained stable even under extreme pressure. The following days brought a series of challenges that seemed designed by someone with a twisted imagination and unlimited creativity. Marcus found himself completing complex tasks while suspended upside down, solving puzzles while electrical stimulation created muscle spasms in his arms, and maintaining accuracy on shooting exercises while drugs that affected his coordination coursed through his system. Each challenge pushed him into territory where normal training and preparation were insufficient, requiring him to discover new reserves of capability and determination. One particularly memorable test required Marcus to perform precise manual tasks while wearing a virtual reality headset that showed him a completely different environment than the one his body was actually in. His hands had to operate in the real world while his eyes and brain processed information from a virtual landscape that bore no relation to his physical surroundings. The cognitive load required to function effectively under these conditions was unlike anything he had ever experienced, pushing his brain to adapt and perform in ways that seemed almost supernatural. The physical challenges escalated beyond anything found in conventional military training. Marcus completed obstacle courses while carrying weights that increased throughout the exercise, forcing him to adapt his technique and strategy as his capabilities were progressively reduced. He performed combat drills while breathing through apparatus that limited his oxygen intake, simulating the effects of high altitude or chemical environments. Swimming exercises took place in water that was gradually heated or cooled to test his ability to maintain performance as environmental conditions became increasingly hostile. Dr. Foster's experiments pushed into areas that seemed more like science fiction than military testing. Marcus found himself connected to machines that monitored his brain activity while he performed complex tasks, allowing researchers to observe how his mind allocated resources and adapted to increasing demands. Biofeedback exercises taught him to control bodily functions he had never known were voluntary, opening up possibilities for enhanced performance that challenged everything he thought he knew about human limitations. The most challenging aspect of the second week was not any single test, but the cumulative effect of constant pressure and uncertainty. Marcus never knew what each day would bring, when challenges would begin, or how long they would last. This uncertainty created a psychological environment that was perhaps more demanding than any specific physical or mental challenge. He had to maintain readiness for anything while simultaneously recovering from whatever had just been completed. Sleep deprivation became a constant factor as the week progressed. Marcus found himself operating on 3 or 4 hours of sleep per night, with testing beginning at random times that prevented him from establishing any predictable rest pattern. The combination of physical exhaustion, mental fatigue, and psychological stress created conditions that would have broken many people. But Marcus discovered reserves of endurance that surprised even him. The monitoring equipment revealed that Marcus's performance actually improved under certain types of stress. When challenges were clearly defined and had specific performance standards, he seemed to thrive regardless of how difficult the conditions became. The precision and discipline required for his role as a tomb guard had created capabilities that became more pronounced rather than diminished when external pressures increased. By the middle of the second week, Marcus realized that the testing was not just about measuring his capabilities, but about discovering new possibilities for human performance. The researchers were not just documenting what he could do, but exploring what might be possible if training methods could be developed to enhance and replicate the mental and physical characteristics they were observing. The team of specialists monitoring Marcus's progress seemed increasingly excited about the data they were collecting. Dr. Chen mentioned that his psychological resilience was providing insights into stress management that could benefit soldiers throughout the military. Major Rodriguez noted that his ability to maintain precision under pressure suggested new approaches to marksmanship and tactical training. Dr. Foster remained characteristically mysterious about his research, but his enthusiasm suggested that Marcus was helping to validate theories about human performance that had previously been only theoretical. The camaraderie that developed between Marcus and the research team was unexpected but became an important source of motivation as the challenges intensified. These scientists and military professionals were not just studying him, but working alongside him to push the boundaries of what was possible. Their excitement about the discoveries being made helped Marcus understand that his participation was contributing to something much larger than personal advancement. As the second week neared its conclusion, Marcus felt transformed by the experience. The challenges had pushed him far beyond what he had thought possible, revealing capabilities he didn't know he possessed and teaching him things about himself that would influence the rest of his life. The mental toughness and discipline he had developed as a tomb guard had proven to be the foundation for performance that exceeded normal human limitations. The final days would bring the ultimate test, challenges designed to determine whether Marcus could apply everything he had learned and discovered during his 2 weeks at the facility. But already both Marcus and the research team knew that something remarkable had been accomplished. The careful discipline and unwavering commitment to excellence that had made him an exceptional tomb guard had proven to be the key to unlocking human potential in ways that none of them had fully anticipated. The final test arrived without warning or fanfare, beginning when Marcus was awakened by Dr. Chen at an unusual hour, with instructions that were both simple and terrifying. He had 24 hours to complete a series of challenges that would determine the ultimate outcome of his evaluation. No details were provided about what these challenges would involve, when they would occur, or how he would be judged. This uncertainty was itself part of the test, designed to evaluate how he functioned when operating with incomplete information under maximum pressure. The first challenge materialized during what appeared to be a routine breakfast meeting with the research team. Marcus was halfway through discussing the previous day's results when alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Security personnel rushed into the room announcing a simulated emergency that required immediate evacuation to a secure location. Within minutes, Marcus found himself in an underground bunker with limited supplies and instructions to maintain communications with an outside command center while managing a crisis scenario that seemed to grow more complex by the hour. The scenario was incredibly realistic, involving multiple moving parts that required Marcus to make decisions with incomplete information while managing stress levels that would have overwhelmed most people. He had to coordinate rescue operations for simulated casualties, manage resources during a supposed power outage, and maintain operational security while communication systems appeared to be failing around him. Every decision he made had cascading consequences that affected the success of the overall mission, and there was no time to second-guess himself or seek additional guidance. What made this challenge particularly demanding was the realization that his performance was being evaluated not just on his ability to complete specific tasks, but on how he managed his own psychological state while dealing with chaos and uncertainty. The mental discipline he had developed during long hours of guard duty at Arlington became crucial as he worked to maintain focus and clear thinking despite the simulated crisis swirling around him. As the scenario continued, additional complications were introduced that tested every skill Marcus had developed during his 2 weeks of evaluation. Physical challenges required him to move heavy equipment while exhausted from hours of mental stress. Cognitive demands forced him to process complex information while dealing with sensory overload from alarms, flashing lights, and competing radio transmissions. The combination of stressors was designed to push him beyond the point where normal training would be sufficient. Hours into the exercise, Marcus began to understand that this was not just a test of his individual capabilities, but an evaluation of how he could perform when everything he had learned during his time at the facility was combined under maximum pressure. The precision required reminded him of his guard duty, where every movement had to be perfect regardless of weather, fatigue, or distraction. The mental endurance demanded was similar to those long nights at Arlington, when he had to maintain focus through hours of repetitive duty. But now these familiar elements were combined with physical and cognitive challenges that pushed far beyond anything he had previously experienced. The psychological pressure intensified when Marcus realized that some of the scenarios required him to make decisions that involved simulated life and death consequences. He found himself choosing between multiple courses of action, where any choice would result in simulated casualties, forcing him to make impossible decisions while maintaining the clear thinking necessary to minimize overall harm. These moral and ethical dilemmas added a layer of stress that was different from physical or mental challenges, testing his character and judgment under conditions where there were no perfect solutions. 12 hours into the final test, exhaustion began to take its toll despite all of Marcus's preparation and conditioning. His hands started to shake slightly during precision tasks. His reaction times slowed by fractions of seconds that became significant under the demanding standards being applied, and his cognitive processing showed signs of the sustained stress he had been under for days. But instead of performance collapsing as might be expected, Marcus found that his fundamental capabilities remained intact. The mental discipline and physical conditioning he had developed seemed to provide a foundation that held firm even when everything else was pushed to the breaking point. The research team monitoring Marcus's performance was documenting something they had never seen before. Most people showed significant degradation in multiple areas when subjected to this level of combined stress. But Marcus's performance, while certainly affected by fatigue and pressure, remained within acceptable parameters for critical tasks. More importantly, his decision-making process remained rational and ethical, even when he was operating at the very edge of his capabilities. The final phase of the test introduced an element that surprised everyone involved, including the researchers who had designed it. Marcus was informed that the exercise was being terminated due to his exceptional performance, but then immediately faced with evidence that suggested the termination announcement was itself part of the test. He had to decide whether to relax his vigilance based on official-sounding instructions or maintain his performance level, despite being told the evaluation was over. This meta-challenge tested not just his capabilities, but his wisdom and judgment about when those capabilities should be applied. Marcus's decision to maintain his performance standards despite the apparent end of testing proved to be the correct choice, revealing another layer of evaluation that tested his understanding of duty and responsibility. The lesson was clear. True excellence meant maintaining standards regardless of whether anyone was watching or evaluating. This principle, which had been fundamental to his service as a tomb guard, proved to be equally important in this completely different context. As the 24-hour period finally concluded, Marcus found himself sitting in the same briefing room where his evaluation had begun 2 weeks earlier. But he was a fundamentally different person than the tomb guard who had arrived with curiosity and uncertainty about what lay ahead. The testing had revealed capabilities he didn't know he possessed, and had pushed those capabilities to levels that seemed almost superhuman. More importantly, it had shown him that the mental discipline and commitment to excellence he had developed at Arlington were not just applicable to ceremonial duties, but were foundation stones for human performance at the highest levels. The exhaustion was overwhelming, but underneath the fatigue was a sense of accomplishment that was different from anything Marcus had experienced before. He had been tested in ways that pushed every aspect of his being to its limits, and he had not just survived, but had performed at levels that surprised everyone involved, including himself. The precision and dedication that had made him an exceptional Tomb Guard had proven to be the key to unlocking human potential in ways that would influence military training and selection for years to come. Dr. Chen, Major Rodriguez, Dr. Foster, and Colonel Patterson gathered around the table where Marcus sat trying to process everything that had happened. Their faces showed a mixture of exhaustion, excitement, and something that looked remarkably like awe. The data they had collected over the past 2 weeks, and particularly during the final 24-hour test, had exceeded their most optimistic expectations and had implications that reached far beyond the scope of their original research objectives. The debriefing session that followed Marcus's final test lasted for hours and revealed the true scope of what had been accomplished during his 2 weeks at the facility. Colonel Patterson began by explaining that Marcus had not just passed their evaluation, but had performed at levels that exceeded the theoretical models the researchers had used to design their tests. The combination of mental discipline, physical capability, and psychological resilience he had demonstrated was unprecedented in their experience and had implications that reached far beyond individual performance. Assessment. Dr. Chen presented psychological data that showed Marcus's stress response patterns were unlike anything in the scientific literature. Where most people showed increasing degradation under sustained pressure, Marcus had actually improved in certain areas as challenges intensified. His ability to maintain focus and decision-making capability under extreme stress suggested new possibilities for training soldiers to perform at superhuman levels. The mental conditioning he had developed as a Tomb Guard had created neural pathways and psychological structures that seemed to thrive under pressure rather than break down. The physical performance data presented by Dr. Foster was equally remarkable. Marcus had demonstrated the ability to maintain fine motor control and coordination, even when his body was pushed far beyond normal endurance limits. More significantly, his recovery patterns showed that he could bounce back from extreme physical stress faster and more completely than predicted by existing models of human physiology. The disciplined lifestyle and mental toughness required for Tomb Guard duty had apparently created physiological adaptations that enhanced his overall capabilities. Major Rodriguez focused on the tactical and operational implications of Marcus's performance. The precision and reliability he had shown under pressure suggested new approaches to training special operations personnel. Traditional selection methods focused on identifying people who could perform well under stress, but Marcus had demonstrated the possibility of developing those capabilities through the kind of mental discipline and commitment to excellence that characterized the best Tomb Guards. The conversation took an unexpected turn when Colonel Patterson revealed the true purpose behind the testing program. The military was developing new training protocols based on principles observed in elite ceremonial units like the Tomb Guards. The hypothesis was that the mental discipline required for ceremonial precision could be adapted to create enhanced performance in combat and special operations contexts. Marcus's evaluation had been designed to test this theory, and his results provided compelling evidence that the approach had tremendous potential. The implications extended beyond military applications. Dr. Chen explained that the psychological principles Marcus had demonstrated could benefit first responders, medical personnel, and anyone whose job required maintaining performance under extreme pressure. The research data would contribute to understanding how human beings could be trained to function at levels that had previously been considered impossible. Marcus had essentially served as a prototype for enhanced human performance capabilities. The offer that came next was both incredible and overwhelming. Colonel Patterson explained that Marcus was being invited to help develop and lead a new training program that would apply the lessons learned from his evaluation to prepare soldiers for the most demanding military assignments. He would work with the research team to create protocols that could develop in other soldiers the same capabilities he had demonstrated. The program would be based at the facility where he had been tested, and he would be promoted to sergeant with opportunities for further advancement as the program expanded. But there was another option that surprised Marcus even more. He could return to his duties as a Tomb Guard, bringing with him everything he had learned about himself and his capabilities. The experience had shown that his service at Arlington was not just ceremonial duty, but was actually a form of advanced training that developed extraordinary human capabilities. He could continue his sacred watch over the unknown soldier while serving as a model and mentor for other guards who might eventually participate in similar evaluations. The decision was perhaps the most difficult Marcus had ever faced. The opportunity to help develop revolutionary training methods was incredibly appealing and would allow him to serve his country in ways he had never imagined possible. The research team had become like family to him during the intense 2 weeks of testing, and the chance to continue working with them was personally attractive. But the pull of his duty at Arlington remained strong, and he had gained a new appreciation for the value and importance of what Tomb Guards accomplished. Marcus asked for time to consider his options, and the team readily agreed. They understood that someone who had demonstrated his level of commitment to duty would not make such a decision lightly. Dr. Chen mentioned that regardless of what he decided, Marcus had already contributed to advancing human performance research in ways that would benefit countless people. His participation had been a gift to science and to his country that would have impacts for decades to come. As Marcus prepared to leave the facility, he realized that the most important discovery from his 2 weeks of testing was not about his individual capabilities, but about the potential that existed in dedicated service itself. His time as a tomb guard had not been just ceremonial duty, but had been unconsciously developing capabilities that exceeded normal human limitations. The precision, discipline, and unwavering commitment to excellence required for that sacred duty had created a foundation for performance that amazed even experts in human capabilities. The journey back to Arlington gave Marcus time to reflect on everything that had happened and everything he had learned about himself. He was returning as a fundamentally different person than the one who had left 2 weeks earlier. But he was also returning with a deeper understanding of the true value and importance of his role as a tomb guard. The unknown soldiers he watched over had not just been beneficiaries of his service, but had actually been part of a training process that developed extraordinary human capabilities. When Marcus finally stood once again before the tomb of the unknown soldier, he felt a profound sense of completion and purpose. Whether he decided to continue his duties at Arlington or accept the opportunity to help develop new training programs, he now understood that his service had meaning and value that extended far beyond what he had ever imagined. The precision of his movements, the discipline of his routine, and the dedication of his watch were not just tributes to fallen soldiers, but were actually forging capabilities that could serve his country in ways he was only beginning to understand. The choice ahead would define the next phase of his military career. But Marcus knew that regardless of what he decided, his experience had proven that extraordinary human performance was possible when built on a foundation of unwavering commitment to duty, precision, and service to something greater than oneself. The unknown soldiers had taught him more than he had ever taught himself, and that lesson would guide him whatever path he chose to follow.